and a warm welcome from Switzerland. My name is Peter Pedross, and I'm CEO and founder of PEDCO. In today's webinar, we discuss mixing agile and other life cycles in large-scale complex environments. I would like to express my thanks to our partner Cprime for hosting this session today. It is an important topic for myself, as I hear more and more discussions at conferences and see studies about hybrid approaches where concepts are interwoven and sometimes principles are even turned upside down. However, it must be recognized that it's often difficult for organizations to go all in with Agile for various reasons, such as dependencies on external partners, organizations who are using waterfall, internal culture that requires time to shift to Agile, or even solutions which have a lifetime of several decades, as we see, for example, in the automotive industry. There are a number of good ways to handle such complex environments, and I would like to talk to you today a little bit about context, possible solutions, and some aspects. Before I start, I would like to introduce myself. You see me live on the camera, and this is a picture which has been taken 2 years ago. And I started programming at the age of 15 for money, and I have worked in almost all possible positions in IT in the last 35 years. That was assembler, COBOL programming, up to tester and Smalltalk programming, project lead, software architect, quality manager, and in my last position, I was process responsible at one of the leading Swiss financial institutes. I was responsible there worldwide for the entire set of life cycles, processes, methods, and tools used for 9,500 developers. At this place, we had to comply with regulators from FINMA, from a Swiss regulator, the Fed, London, Singapore, and we had to reach CMMI maturity level 3 worldwide. And I also studied software engineering, finance, and management psychology. As I like to talk about my work, I have given several publications and lectures. The first was about distributed Smalltalk at the IBM conference in San Francisco in 1995. Last one was about scaled agility in regulated environments at the Agile in Automotive in Stuttgart, where Porsche come from and Mercedes some weeks ago. Of course, I'm also certified for Scaled Agile Framework, Disciplined Agile Delivery, CMMI, and the European Foundation of Quality Assurance, the UFQA model. And this is very important for me because I'm also president of the board for computer science at the Swiss Association of Quality and also a member of the board of directors there. So for the bandwidth, I will turn off my camera right now as I will continue with the presentation. And bye-bye for the camera. And now I would like to show you the agenda. In this webinar, we will discuss some of the different organizational, architectural, and engineering aspects in order to bring interoperability between Agile and Waterfall and other life cycles at scale, and why we should bother about such things. This will be concluded by some lessons learned and a QA session. But first, we would like to start a poll. Miriam?
All right, let's go to our first poll. And for our first question, a very simple, straightforward question. We'd like to know what role you play in your organization. And your choices are C-level, engineering, quality managers, process engineers, or an agile role, developer, scrum master, etc. Or you don't fit in any of those categories. So we will give everyone a chance to respond to the poll, and then we'll share. So Peter, I can tell you that from what I'm seeing, I'm going to close the poll. And as you can see, about 3/4 of our attendees are in some kind of agile role within their organization, and 30% are in other roles. So what do you think about those results?
Okay, Yeah, 75% agile coaches. That's a surprise to me, but very fine. Okay, so I will put the emphasis a little bit more on the agile topics. 30% other roles, I assume they're process engineers or quality managers and interested in other life cycles. So I will show the mix, but I will put a little bit more emphasis on the agile side. If you would like to hear a little bit more on other things, just type in a question on the chat. And Miriam, just remind me that there was a question or something, and then I will answer that immediately. We reserved like 15 minutes for questions and answers at the end, but if you think in between there's a question, an understanding question, then just raise the question, please. Okay, so about the project development cycles, and this is something that has really triggered me some weeks ago. That just came out this May 2018, and I was in at SwissQ. That is a study from Switzerland, and it has been done since 10 years, talking about trends and benchmarks in developing software. And they ask also about Agile, and one thing that really struck me was that we see some kind of funny discussions going on, and it is understandable that we see, if you ask for waterfall, that 38.4% of the teams within waterfall are starting to apply somehow Scrum and Agile methodologies. You see Kanban as well, Scrumban and others, but also Hermes 5, that's a Swiss regulatory environment, but that they are applying that in waterfall, and I think this is a very good sign. On the other side, on the contrary, in Agile, they ask also what kind of method are you using, and you would expect that you would see Scrum, Kanban, or Scrumban and XP, and you see that, but the one which struck me really was that we see here waterfall at almost 24% of the usage, and that's a number which has increased in 2018 compared to the last 2 other years. And this is something that I heard as well at the conference here in Bern in Switzerland like 5 weeks ago. One manager said, we're going to combine the 2 life cycles, waterfall, and the good things of waterfall and Agile. We're going to develop Agile and keep the fixed time, fixed budget, and fixed requirements from the waterfall. So we have the combination of both. And this is something, yeah, that puts me a little bit in a strange position, and there's some confusion going on. So I would like to put that into context. We have, why should we bother about different life cycles? We have increasing competitive pressure, high innovation levels and high efficiency, low time to market. And you see that on the right side from all those companies which we have named here. Most of them, they didn't exist 10 years ago. And some of them did exist, but they just have changed their business model dramatically. For example, Apple, they came out with their iPhone in 2007, and that's only 11 years ago, and that's like their main income of their business. And now we have Industry 4.0, we have Lean Startup, Agile, and most of the companies are starting Agile transformation, even the large automotive suppliers, automotive companies, defense, and so forth. And what we see there is they are still working with waterfall. The major number of the projects are working with waterfall or with the V model, very common in the automotive industry. The rational unified process iterative life cycles are very well used as well. Product development life cycles, SDLC, Scrum, discipline, Agile delivery, agility at scale, SAFe, and so forth. And when we talk now about cyber physical systems, which have an increased complexity and dependencies, you have to work with teams, probably with suppliers, which might work traditionally. So you already are in a situation where you have to deal with such a complexity. If you look at Agile and just Agile, that was built for teams up to 10 people. So that is too small to build complex systems. You need sometimes hundreds, several thousand people to develop a complex system. To make that even worse, we have regulatory and organizational environments which are becoming ever more demanding. And that puts companies into risk of going all in for companies in Agile. This is a very high risk, and they're really considering what they're going to do with that. There has been a recent study by Scott Ambler from Disciplined Agile Delivery, and he asked if the teams are facing compliance from the regulator or organizational issues as well. And 68% of the teams are already facing compliance or organizational regulatory requirements as well. And we see a lot of companies. There is one automotive company. They have an average expected lifetime of a product of 24 years. So the future engineers maintaining a today released solution are probably just in the kindergarten, or even better, you're dealing with a component which was built 20 years ago. And if you consider all those topics, a strategy and the governance to steer that is needed. There are 75% of the participants from an Agile coach, so I guess most of you are aware of this study by version 1. And scaled agility, and mostly the Scaled Agile Framework, is being adopted extensively throughout the industry. In most large enterprises, however, there is a transition period wherein many existing programs will continue to apply the waterfall, while other programs are moving quickly to an agile delivery. And such agile programs are mostly not independent, and some degree of organizational and solution level dependencies exist. And this can lead to conflicting methods and expectations, and can even put common delivery objectives into serious jeopardy. And this study here from version 1, the 12th, and it just came out in April 2018, lists the most used framework in scaled agility. Because we are not talking only about one life cycle, there are several life cycles which we could mix, where we could have hybrid methods. So it shows that about 50% of all projects are either SAFe, Scaled Agile Framework, or Scrum of Scrums. And if you take into consideration that some sort of Scrum of Scrums is included on the program level of SAFe, it is fair to say that almost 50% are using that frameworks. We see that internally created method then got reduced compared to last year, where it was 13%, and disciplined agile delivery and large-scale Scrum were picking up. I think that it's fair to say that more formal methods are picking up. I prepared that slide, so most of you probably are already aware of the Scaled Agile Framework, the #1 framework for scaled agility, and the assumptive one-pass stage-gated waterfall methods of the past. They have not scaled to the new challenge, and a more responsive development method is needed to take on challenges as we presented before, and Agile is a major step in that direction. But Agile does not scale to the needs of the larger enterprises and the system they create. That's where SAFe comes into play, and we see here the so-called full configuration of SAFe. It applies the power of Agile, but takes it to the next level by leveraging the more extensive knowledge pools of system thinking and lean product development. SAFe builds on principles and core values as shown on the right. On the team level, we start with a representation of an Agile team on the button here. We see that Agile teams from this level are working together in a program to align their work. They plan together in the so-called PI planning, and they align with the various boards, Kanban boards, up to the program, large solution, and portfolio level. A program has a so-called Agile Release Train, and this analogy is taken because it has a cadence. They have a cadence-based delivery, and that is what we think is important for the program, and that's the core value of program execution. Then these align up to the strategic themes, the Kanban of epics, capabilities, the program level of the features, down to the stories of a backlog. And if we want to have cadence and the continuous delivery pipeline, then we need to have no technical debt. And technical debt can be avoided in that we have each system increment with a certain quality delivered. And that is why building quality is one of the core values of SAFe as well. I will later show some specific examples based on the SAFe framework, but most things also apply for other life cycles. A lot of concepts which I will show diagrams and examples come from our experience with our product applied SAFe, and it allows to implement SAFe fast and precise, as it includes a comprehensive process model with roles, activities, templates, guidelines, metrics, tailoring, milestone and phases. And as you can independently instantiate on each level, you can customize with a built-in tailoring and run multiple concurrent process variations. And of course, you can extend, adopt, and integrate with your own process assets. It includes also the complete content of SAFe, and each version is elaborated in sync with the future versions of SAFe, and it gets officially approved by Scaled Agile. It includes compliance mechanisms and capabilities for regulated environments, as well as a complete implementation of the relentless improvement. I think there is a chat message going on, so I will look at for that. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. So most large-scale complex environments are dealing with varying levels of criticality. They have safety critical to security critical. And such areas are mostly regulated, and it is necessary to comply with formal standards, regulations, directives, and guidance. There's a plethora of regulations and standards which apply across different regulated domains, but luckily, most of these regulations ask for the same common things. They usually want to see that you have somehow a quality defined, that you have a managed process and an established quality management system. They also want to see that you have the execution and the continuous compliance somehow under control, that you have safety and security in place. And if you talk about the FDA, they talk about design controls, how you can make sure that your design is really fitting the purpose of a solution. That is the most striking one that a lot of people forget, is that most and all, I would say all regulated environments, they ask you somehow to manage the process and the solution variations. So each endeavor, each project needs to reduce waste and do exactly what is needed. It's not okay that you start with the biggest possible process in your company and just say all the projects will follow that. You need to call on the traceability, so you need to ensure process compliance, but also how you deal with the product compliance. A lot of regulated environments ask you also for product requirements, which are coming from the regulatory. And they want you that you base verification and validation on principles and practice, and you know how this is done, and this is defined. Now let's move to the topic of solution development in SAFe from the perspective of a mixing life cycles. But first, there's a poll. And Miriam?
Yes, thank you, Peter. So for our second poll, we'd like to know if your organization is currently handling a mix of agile development life cycles. So you're about to start doing that. Yes, you already do, but yes, you do and it's working well. You're just information gathering at this time, or no, you do not have mixed life cycles in your organization. So we'll let everybody answer the poll. A couple more seconds. All right, I'm going to close the poll. And Peter, we find that about 3/4 of our attendees do have a mix of development life cycles, but I don't think that surprises you, does it?
Oh yes, it does. And yeah, okay. I wish I would know which companies these are, but yeah, okay, very good. Yeah, okay. And the other results.
So we have about 10% that have that situation in their organization and it's working well for them, and then about 10% that are about to start engaging in handling a mix in their organization.
Very good. It's not surprising that large-scale organizations are facing that problem, because it's just a fact. I mean, that's why we have this talk here as well. But I thought it is still the case that we still have a lot of companies which are mid-sized and they are small-sized companies with like 200 people or so, and they would do pure Agile or pure SAFe. So this comes to a surprise to me, because 75 plus 20 is 95% are dealing with that problem. So thank you very much. That's really interesting. So it's even more hot topic than I thought it is. Okay, so in our experience, the optimal scenario for continuous value delivery is an enterprise-wide deployment of the Scaled Agile Framework, and the use of a common cadence that synchronizes all programs and teams is a key mechanism that enables this to occur. Well, however, it must be recognized that it's often difficult for organizations to go all in with Agile for various reasons, such as dependencies or external partners, organizations who are using waterfall, internal culture that requires time to shift to Agile mindset, etc. As proposed by SAFe, teams can run with Scrum or Kanban as an Agile method. Additionally, it is possible to coexist with other lifecycles. Team and other programs can choose their lifecycle depending on their needs and their Agile readiness. And this solution has the advantage to let some teams smoothly adopt Agile, while other teams could choose to other life cycles to work with, such as, for example, the V model, disciplined Agile delivery, iterative, or waterfall. This is something that we did at major Swiss financial institutes as well. We had waterfall, iterative, Agile, and maintenance life cycle all together defined. There are companies around with huge process assets and existing quality management systems. There are even companies which we have seen with more than 6,500 standard operating procedures in place and several thousand people working on different solutions. So it is common that in larger companies, a lot of practices, standard operating procedures exist. And it's also common that different lifecycle models are concurrently executed in the same company. And for that, we need an Agile quality management system, which needs strategies, concepts, and guidelines on how such an integration and extension can be done. There's also one practice described in SAFe, which is called Technical Strategies for Agile and Waterfall Interoperability at Scale. Now I would like to go into some of the aspects, and first I would like to talk is about the organizational aspect of doing so. And we see here quality management systems, and organizations, they must demonstrate that their system meets its intended purpose and has no unintended consequences that might cause harm. That is what I said with the FDA requirements. And they must also develop the objective evidence required to prove that the system conforms to regulatory standards. And to that end, organizations that build high assurance systems, they define their approved practices, policies, and procedures in the quality management system. Unfortunately, quality management systems of many organizations are still heavily influenced by traditional phase-gated waterfall methods, and this seriously inhibits or can even prevent the adoption of newer methods. As an example would be that, as we have seen in the rational unified process, the use of use cases was almost a given and is totally interwoven with the process. So this picture here from SAFe, this comes from SAFe, states that also the quality management systems need to be agile as well, and in our case, need to take different life cycles into consideration. So you can expect that the quality management system itself will undergo much more changes than in the past. Fortunately, most lifecycle models describe more the organizational aspect of work. So they say how to plan, how to improve, how to build, how to document, but not as much about how something is done, about the engineering practice. So you need to show how to synchronize milestones and different cadences of deliveries. And a lot of companies have even milestones with numbers. And just imagine, I just seen that yesterday in Germany, what means milestone number 7? If you're new to a company, that's totally not possible what you say. So you need some design patterns like interfaces to use. You need also to be able to answer what happens with the existing documentation. If you have an application that exists since 20 years, you will find a lot of content there. So what kind of documentation is expected in regards of the solution which you want to build, change, or maintain? And regardless of the chosen lifecycle model and the sequence of activities, it is important to ensure that inputs and outputs maintain a consistent state. For example, in the FDA terms, this is called the design control. And in our view, regulatory perspectives align well on the value and the importance of design inputs as the basis for the design of systems, and both align on the value and the importance of the design output that defines the result of the design process in a way that allows the design to be validated. And finally, both align on the value of verification and validation, showing that requirements and ultimately the user's expectations have been satisfied. So what can be different within different life cycles? What will be the same? At the end, the documentation might be produced differently using agile principles and practices, but the finished product might not look any different than it did before agile was introduced. So there is a solution-centric approach. So what are the accepted practices to use? We need to start decoupling of release elements. With that, I would like to show that you have also processes instance, and here this is a description, a part of a meta model, and we see that we have process instances which reflect the process description of a specific lifecycle, and they even can have different meta models. So in some you have milestones, in other lifecycles you probably don't have, and these are all bound to the process elements which we are using. And the process elements of activities of the process, they're organizational depending, and the practices of engineering, they're depending on how you build something, how you do something. We see here an example which is heavily used, which is a very popular model used, for example, in the automotive industry. It's called the V model. It has a lot of practices are defined on how things get documented, designed, implemented, and tested. Most already existing practices can still be used, but you have to differentiate between the engineering practices and organizational patterns. An example for engineering could be how to define test data, test cases, how to validate something. And for organizational requirements, it could be, for example, how to evolve, review, release, and document design. If you talk about documentation, there is, we see here a symbolic view of a solution-centric approach as a skeleton to build up a solution which comes with the natural evolution, seen as an analogy in architecture. We see here that we have a skeleton. Probably this could be a use case model, and each time we come up with a system increment, we fill up those blankets here, and then we have some kind of a use case or alternative flows which grow into the use case model. We talked about this solution-centric approach in detail in our previous webinar about Agile requirements engineering. As said, in SAFe and in Agile, a complete upfront documentation of requirements is neither practical nor enforceable. So here's a possible solution that works regardless of the used life cycles. We start with a useful patchwork documentation. This is based on a skeleton, which can be completed step by step, following the natural evolution of the solution with each increment we work here. For example, we start with a vision and some features, then we fill it up and well. If you want to do that somehow, you need the guidelines to build up such an evolutionary and incremental documentation. There has been one company in Holland, for example. They agreed on such a solution-centric approach, and what they're doing is they never fill out the acceptance criteria, for example. They just point to they just trace to the right point into the skeleton documentation. And for that, if you have that, the skeleton must hold all attributes to scale up, support the needed flexibility and support for variation, but must not contain all content in advance. And we have seen that an Agile approach is best to comply with here. We see here an element of SAFe, which is called the solution intent. We could consider that also as a container for such a skeleton as we have shown before. And when building systems that have an unacceptable high cost of failure, one significant barrier to Agile adoption is the need for more rigorous definition and validation of system behavior. While many practitioners resonate with the Agile manifesto value statement of working software over comprehensive documentation, those can become conflicting priorities for enterprise that really need both. So engineering of complex and highly reliable solutions requires and creates large amounts of technical information. Much of this information reflects the intended behavior of the solution, features, capabilities, stories, non-functional requirements, design, architecture, models, for example, electrical and mechanical interfaces, customer specification, and traceability, which build up the solution. And easy speaking, it contains what the current system does now and what changes are intended for a future state. Now, if we remind that we need to have a quality management system which clearly defines what is needed, then you need to be defined very clearly what that looks like. It's not okay to have several teams, projects, or however you call your endeavors to talk about the same things in different meanings, terms, or harmony. We see here an example in Applied SAFe where we show the work products and its relations. We see here that the solution is made up of the current solution and the future solution, and the future solution is imposed by the solution intent, which sets the person for the solution vision. And each time that we develop something from the future solution to the current solution, this is done with a solution increment, which is under control with the solution increment definition of done. We see also that the solution consists of several systems, and we have here the composite pattern that systems can exist, can contain other systems as well. And we really think that a model like this helps a lot to cut down on discussion time on how something is meant and to support it with the ALM tools, because if you have such clear work products and cardinalities, we really can implement it with a tool. Now I would like to talk about architectural aspects and applying different releases. Release frequencies raise another question. Is a release a monolithic all or nothing process? And if so, the release strategy would be limited. Fortunately, that is usually not the case. In fact, even simple solutions will have multiple release elements, each operating with different release strategy. Think of, for example, of an app for a flight booking system. No, for a flight booking system. The app can have an agile lifecycle, here on the top. It is possible to build the booking system on a Streamlit 4 on a mainframe, and this is maintained in a waterfall lifecycle. We don't recommend this, but this is possible. And in SAFe, such separate flows of values are called streamlets. They represent a full end-to-end flow of value, and each streamlet can and should be managed to deliver value according to its own needs and pace. And identifying those streamlets is critical to enable release on demand, and as they allow the different elements of the solution to be released independently in a separate cadence. A lot of implementations are also working with feature toggles. Probably you have heard about it, but feature toggles are like switches which enable deployment of features into production without making them visible to the end user. They help to avoid the need for multiple code branches and allow developers to deploy new features to production, but only activate them when the enterprise is ready to consume them. And after the feature has been released and deemed stable, the toggles are removed to avoid any technical debt. As stated in the sample from the slide before, that's how it can be done as defined in the QMS. And you can steer that with, here is an example, with the so-called release definition of done. And in Agile, this is like a contract, but in Waterfall, it might be written within the process description of itself. So that means you wouldn't change the release process in the waterfall lifecycle, but you would make it in the release definition of done lifecycle. In the Agile lifecycle, you define the release definition of done, and then you can have the same behavior, but it's not the same way. So now I would like to talk about some engineering aspects, and the ability to release on demand is a critical aspect of SAFe, which raises 3 questions that allow programs to embrace the SAFe principle, assume variability, and preserve options. The questions are, when should we release, what elements of the system should be released, and which end user should receive the release. And having all the 3 options accelerate and provides flexibility in delivering value. And further, release on demand closes the loop on evaluating the benefit hypothesis. Releasing provides data needed to decide whether further exploration of an idea is warranted. In the example of a flight booking system, that you need new functionality, or perhaps a different approach on the mobile devices is needed because it was into the wrong direction. And for that, you can have several release strategies that may apply. You can release on PI cadence, release less frequently, release more frequently, but at the end, or release on demand. And for organization, building complex solutions with system of systems, as we've seen before, fixed or less frequent releasing is probably oversimplistic. Big systems often contain different types of components and subsystems, and each of which may leverage its release model. In that case, the most general model is release whatever you want and whenever it makes sense to you, within an appropriate governance and business model, of course. Release on demand requires the quality management system to develop the following capabilities. You need to be able to decouple the release from development cadence, decouple the release elements from the solution, and architect the solution to support incremental releases. And the following slide will describe such capabilities. To integrate frequently, we work with mockups and design to interfaces. Those mockups allow to test interface assumptions before the system is really available, and nothing helps as much as a physical integration. And when, as we see in this example, the waterfall team will only deliver working software in the end, and then interface become the most real thing possible. Mockups are good when they bridge both the system integration and personal communication gaps between the teams. Mocks simulate interfaces and should be discussed first during architecture and design workshops. The best case scenario occurs when the waterfall teams themselves create mock-ups for agile teams. If this is not possible, the agile teams could do it by themselves, but they need to be carefully reviewed by the waterfall counterparts. Otherwise, they will only test a set of invalid assumptions. So you start the design to interface when you're using mocks, and it is highly recommended to couple mock-up development with the native means of capturing the interface that a program language provides, for example, like interfaces in Java and so on. This will allow developers to simply replace each mock-up with real implementations as soon as it is available, and if inconsistencies are found, capture them immediately. Frequent integration tests the code and the assumptions that went into it. And as we show here in the picture, by frequent, we mean far more frequent than once near the end of the project. So mockups back for implementation of the logic associated with the mockup interface, which is on its own fastest integrations. So integration can be full or partial, but in either case, what's important is that team integrate without fear. If there are integration failures, team fix the integration errors first and then go back to their own agenda. While realistically, this is nothing like automated continuous integration as proposed by SAFe, but at this level, it still has immense value, even though it's on-demand, manual, and not automated. Good system architects, they use design patterns in their systems. Patterns are important because of the inherent complexity associated with software development and our inability to predict for the long term. And this is true for requirements as well as for system design. Certain system behaviors will change for sure over the time of the implementation. And patterns, they provide design approaches that are more immune to change and lend themselves better to a refactoring. Older engineers will recognize such patterns as they have been named in the book Design Patterns, written by Eric Gamma and Associates. Design patterns such as bridge, adapter, decorator, and chain of responsibility are also helpful here. They foster separation of concerns. Factories foster use of mockups, testability, and early integration as the instantiation of the entities can be separated from their use. Facade patterns foster early validation of integration with legacy systems and so forth. So consider patterns not so much as building blocks for your system, but rather as ways to isolate variability, which will likely be higher if it is dependent on later breaking developments from the waterfall teams. I now would like to summarize our lessons learned from several customers. And what we have seen, that mixing of agile and different life cycles is possible. For that, you need to architecture processes for multi-life cycles. You need to separate between organizational aspects and solution aspects. And because the solution aspects, they tend to be equal for all life cycles. Use design patterns to build independent deployable systems and use architectural features such as feature toggles and switches and so on. It is key to separate the what shall be done from how something is done. What shall be done is usually modeled as an activity in a process model. The how something is done is usually modeled as a practice or a standard operating procedure, and this is not the same. So don't interwove such activities and practices to hard code how something is done. Build and rely on heuristics to model the process for its usage and ensure that the practices can be changed or selected easily by the users themselves. So let them decide if they need a facade pattern or an adapter pattern. The quality management itself needs to be easy accessible and easy to use. It needs also to allow fast process changes and pilot in appropriate levels. We have seen that more than 3 months in Cadence on releasing new processes is is not good. We can't have a system which only improves its processes once a year. This is just too slow for the users. So you need to promote transparency for each endeavor. Process instantiations need to be specialized in order to reduce waste. So if you have 10 programs launched, you usually would have 10 different variations of the very same organizational process, but each of them has its specific version or specific capabilities of the process. You need to train engineers in emergent design, refactoring techniques, and design patterns, and then it works as well. What I would like to say then, this is the but, which I would like to come up, is it's a very complex thing, and it's undermanned, and you cannot underestimate the complexity of mixing life cycles, even if they're only agile life cycles. So you should avoid, if even possible, to mix life cycles at all. I heard that a lot of times now that people start off creating their own life cycle, which they call best of a breed, and I really cannot push as much emphasis on that it's really underestimated how complex this could be and how those things work together. I really have a great respect for people coming up with models of life cycle models with process, because it is much more complex as you could think of in the first one. Don't fool yourself if you're a manager. You can't mix waterfall with agile to achieve higher outcomes, higher customer value in a shorter time, and keep in the same time the project's fixed time, fixed budget, and fixed functionality. This is a silver bullet which will not work, and I just heard that 1 month ago at the conference, and this is really something that worried me. And change value-driven life cycles like agile into a really risk-based approach waterfall in order to avoid design variability. This is something that you shouldn't do, because nobody in these days in this UCO world can say what will be changed in the future and how things would look like. With that, I'm coming to the end of my presentation. We will be at the SAFe Summit in Frankfurt and in Washington now in June, in October in Washington, and at the Agile in Hardware in September. And I would like to open up the questions and answer session. If you would like to reach out to us later, you have here the coordinations and the emails. So Miriam, are there any questions?
Yes, thank you, Peter. I very much want to thank you for providing us with a great set of perspectives on how we can integrate multiple life cycles into a coherent strategy for delivery. And if you have any questions, Peter mentioned, please add them in the comment pane, and we'll get to as many as we can within our time together. So one clarification question that comes from Vince, and I kind of had the same question as him. When you were talking about decoupling the release from the development cadence, he asks, you indicated that there were 2 definitions of done. Was there one for dev and one for release?
Yeah, that's I don't have that slide with me. There are a ton of definition of done. I mean, in Agile, there is everybody knows the definition of done for story, but of course in SAFe we also have the model that we, in Applied SAFe, it's usual that you have definition of done for a team increment, but you have also definition of done for a system increment. You have a definition of done for a solution increment, and you have a system as a definition of done for release management, of course. And these can be different depending on the solution, and this is the part of the solution-centric approach. You can imagine if you have a business-critical solution to be built, which puts your company into danger of going down, then the definition of done will be quite different, and verification, validation will be, and documentation will be done quite different than if you build with the same life cycles an application which is not business critical and only used internally. And there are the difference, and this can be very elegantly steered. Is elegantly an English word? Well, can be steered with these definition of dones. And some companies, they have even the definition of dones for capabilities, feature, and even epics. For example, in an epic definition of done, you would see here that the benefit hypothesis has been validated again, or the return on investment of that epic will be validated. Hope that answers the questions. Are there other questions, Miriam?
Yes, we have many questions, Peter. Okay. So Marcia asks, in our organization, we've been told we can't do Agile, and I've heard this many times, because we're in a regulated environment. What kind of message could she bring back to her leadership to say, no, this is something that we definitely should do?
Yeah, I can't disagree more than that this is not true. I mean, agile and regulated environments goes along very well. But of course, as I said, in these 4 pillars, you need to have a defined process. You need to have those activities in place, roles in place. You need to have a RASIC. You need also to show that the processes are compliant to the various regulated reference models. For example, you map them to automotive spice, and you can show them how do you do that, and then you build instantiation, so you show that you build your own versions for each endeavor, and this is what you see in the regulated environments as well. And in our experience, we have customers. We have large companies which build cockpits in an agile manner, and they are in a regulated environment, and it works very well. You just have to fulfill that you have established QMS, that you train the people on doing that, that you provide an easy-to-use QMS, as I said in the lessons learned, and then it definitely can be done that you have agile and in regulated environments. This is one of the key things which we have in Applied SAFe as well.
Great,
long
thank
question.
you, Peter.
Long answer. Okay.
We have some more questions here. So Zoe asks kind of an interesting question. She says, for teams that are not purely software development, but handling, in this example, she asks about financial research, work in an Agile framework. So do you recommend that they would adhere to a strictly Agile framework, or would you say that it would be better for them to come up with a best-in-breed hybrid for the whole group? So would you have a basically recommendation on how they could customize their lifecycle setup?
Let me think that. And they are doing financial research, you said.
In an Agile framework, correct.
In an Agile framework. Well, it depends a little bit on how big those researches are, but I think it should usually be done in 2 weeks. Otherwise, you can split them up in stories, and then you have like 2 or 3 stories out of one big feature, as you say here, for example, in SAFe. I don't see why this should be a hybrid approach if you do financial research. I mean, if you do a PhD, it takes years, but financial research is, as a gut feeling, I would say no, it's perfectly fine with Agile. You don't need to go to an hybrid approach, because that will bring you other issues as well, how you can align with the Agile teams, how to put the cadence and so on. So it's much easier to adapt to one life cycle. That's what I said, don't mix if it's possible at all. And yeah, I would need more information, but I don't think that financial research should be done in another way than in an Agile way. Then you just have probably 4 or 5 stories per iteration for 2 weeks, and this should be fine as well. Hope that answers the questions. Otherwise, send me an email and I can answer that if I think a little bit more, or if I have more details on the question. Thanks. Okay, great.
And then Ashish asks, they have a lot of hardware in their company, and they're really reluctant on embracing Agile. I know that you've seen this done for hardware. Any recommendations?
Well, at the medical device company, that was a really funny experience, and I can just let me tell you about that experience. And And we developed like a blood testing an instrument, and they were for the big hospitals. They can do like 1,000 blood tests in the same machine in one row. And what we developed was the shaker system, and we had the controls, the electronic decipher, and that these blood examples, they need to be shaken. And we had the problem that not the problem. It turned out that the hardest thing to change was at the end the software, and the fastest way to change in that prototype was the mechanics. So they were much faster than we were, and for them Agile was really cool because they changed their plans, they built a new system, and then within 1 week, 2 weeks, they had a new prototype running, and sometimes we were lacking behind with our software to cope with that. So in my experience, it can work very well. Of course, if you have, like in the automotive industry, if you have big machines who are folding the metals, and then we are not talking about developing, then we are talking about manufacturing. And this is a different thing to talk about. So yeah, for development, I would say hardware isn't that much of an issue as we have seen so far.
Okay, great. And then Drew asks, and actually makes a comment on the compliance slide, and he says that he has an interesting situation where his development teams are doing Agile, but the teams doing quality management are in waterfall. Is that something that you've seen before and have addressed?
Oh yes. That's yeah, that happens a lot. We see that a lot. It's that Agile is like a grassroots movement, and that teams are just eager to use Agile to work in an Agile manner, and that they start up building a lot of teams, and there's a momentum going on. And as long as there are not too many people doing that, and management CIOs usually can then just keep that underneath the radar, and they don't bother about that much. But as soon as there is a certain percentage rates of people doing Agile, it can get into problems, and the quality management system gets involved as well. And it mustn't be that they are a little bit like they have also their method backpack, and they see exactly that statement of we are in regulated environments, we can't do Agile because that is not in blah blah blah. But I would say to them specifically, you're not alone, and there are extremely good papers defined. For example, there is from the CMMI Institute, there is a paper which is like mapping Scrum to CMMI, and that's a very good document. And there's an extremely good document written by the advancement of an AMI, advancement of medical instruments, and this is called the Tier 45 paper. Just typing TER 45, and this is a paper which describes how you can reach FDA Chapter 11 requirements, design controls, all that stuff in Agile. So that has been proven. And I also have had a speech at the 2014 CMMI World Conference, and it was a clear understanding of the lead assessors there that Agile can fulfill CMMI maturity level 5 requirements as well. And there's also the Software Engineering Institute in Pittsburgh. They have a very wonderful document about how to reach Agile in regulated environments. I don't remember the name right now. Sorry for that. If you write me an email, I can send you those links to those documents. To that one who posed me the question. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Peter. We are out of time. And I want to thank you today for a great presentation. I know it went fast, eh? We had so much fun.
Much faster.
And we'd also like to thank you all for taking the time to join us today. And we trust you found this session of value. And as I mentioned before, we will be sending out the recording of the webinar as well as the slides, so wait for those. And we really hope you'll join us soon on another webinar. We always appreciate the time you take to be with us, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much, Peter.
Thank you very much, Miriam, and thank
you, everyone.
to all the participants for listening and participating. Bye-bye.